Hey everyone, welcome to the Eat to Win show where sports nutrition meets peak performance. Get ready for expert insights, real stories, and tips to help you win with every meal. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Eat to Win podcast show. And my name is Margaret Downs. I'm a registered dietitian and a board certified specialist in sports nutrition. We are here to talk about all things sports nutrition and how we help athletes win. Today, we are thrilled to have Dana Sowards, who is a registered dietitian. She's also board certified in sport, and she has specialized in nutrition for female endurance athletes. Dana helps women runners and triathletes fuel for peak performance. She's going to help us debunk some diet myths around this topic and how to help women support their bodies through all phases of life. So let's jump into some essential insights on fueling health, performance, and sustaining nutrition for active women. So Dana, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to dive into everything.
Awesome. Well, I know your expertise is going to be welcomed throughout this podcast, and we just really appreciate your time and willingness to give us that contribution. Just want to get started today talking a little bit about what has inspired you to go into this area. Clearly, you have a focus working with women and endurance athletes. And so, how did you happen upon this area of practice, and what inspired you?
Yeah, so I grew up an athlete and really looked to my coaches for as role models and kind of hung on their every word, and I think was a little bit misguided in what their knowledge base was. And I saw this gap as I got older. I really saw this gap in education out there for female athletes, endurance athletes especially, just because energy needs are so much higher. And so I really wanted to close that gap and help understand or help others understand um, how to fiercely support their bodies. And that's kind of my motto. And my practice is fuel fiercely to support your body and all the things that you're doing as a female athlete. And that's that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you have that athlete perspective that helped develop your passion for this area. And that's super cool. And also, I'm sure, very beneficial in helping others is having that reference point of challenge that you encountered. And it sounds like the misguided, part of that. So, what did you feel like were some challenges that you encountered as a young athlete that led you to want to really give back in this area?
Yeah, so a lot of what I encountered was just the thin ideal, eat less, move more, you should look a certain way in order to perform, and the rhetoric around losing your menstrual cycle, and this is just like a quote unquote normal part of being an athlete. And that was a lot of what was going on for me. And that was just kind of swept under the rug, if you will. And it was very blatantly because of underfueling, that there was a lot more that needed to be addressed. And so that is what I practice a lot today, is just really debunking all of those things, and making sure that athletes know, and especially female athletes, like, we have a really blaring symptom when we lose our cycle. And that is not normal for any of the listeners out there. We should have a normal menstrual cycle anywhere from 21 to 35 days. And if we aren't having a cycle like that is a very big red flag, as something is dysregulated in our system. And typically, it is related to underfueling. That is not end all be all. Definitely, get advice from a medical professional, but that is typically what we see. So those were my symptoms that
Well,
guided
those
me
are
to where I
some
am.
super, and I would say not uncommon challenges that young women would encounter, especially as a runner and in weight dependent sports where, they're looking at that thin ideal as something that they're aspiring to, and that's going to help them become a better athlete, which we know, as you mentioned, can lead to other real health consequences and things that we want to prevent. So, thank you for that insight. So now tell us a little bit about the population you currently work with. I know that you probably have a wide range of women that you're encountering. I don't know if you're working with men too, but if you are, we'd love to hear about that. But tell us a little bit about the age range that you're working with, and maybe some of the challenges that you're encountering in your practice.
Yeah, so I do have a wide age range. I would say athletes really like 30 to 60. And I do have a combination of males and females. I would say I have like 5% men, and the rest are females. So it's very dominantly females. And, obviously with that age range, we are seeing truly like females across the lifespan, and realms of we're in our reproductive years in that like early 30s. And then we start to go through perimenopause around 40. Typically, that's like the very typical age range. And then usually it's like 51 plus is in that menopausal age range. Certainly this can vary, but those are kind of general guidelines in that sense. So across those different life cycle pinpoints, energy needs differentiate just how the body is responding to nutrition and training, and honestly how the body feels on different days. That's a lot of what we go into. Overarching with my female athletes, and actually even my male athletes, I would say the largest thing that I see is under fueling and just honestly, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of the information out there is to that voice of eat less, move more. And as an endurance athlete, we are kind of butting up against really high energy expenditure, just naturally, just the nature of sport. And so if we're trying to eat less and continuing to try to perform all of these endurance activities, we end up with low energy availability. So that's a lot of what I see.
Yeah, very, very insightful there with respect to the demand of energy and the amount of energy that someone is going to require when they are an endurance athlete. And so look forward to hearing a little bit more about, what that looks like from an actual food perspective. I'm sure mood is also a factor for women. Like, if your hormones are changing through these various stages of 30 to 40, 50, and you're still going through, it's maybe also challenging to just stay consistent with respect to how you're feeling, like you said, how your body feels, but maybe also how you're emotionally coping with things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about energy availability, and what is it when you're working with people, and since it does seem to be that there's a low energy intake around what would be an increased need for endurance sport. Tell us a little bit about what you see in that deficit and how you approach trying to correct it.
Yeah, so a lot of what I see is not going into a session adequately supported with nutrition, specifically carbohydrate in this scenario. And so, kind of initially working with somebody, I will just look at their daily intake. And we're not tracking calories, macros. I'm just simply looking at what they send me. And so it's very kind of bare bones, if you will. And I'm just doing an assessment on what they've sent. And then we work on looking at what the duration and intensity of their training is, maybe what even training block they're in at that sense. So are they in a base building versus like a peak training phase? What does that look like? Hours per week that they're training. And that's how we start to formulate what do we need to do to change their performance plate? And so this is what I work on is a performance plate is going to have the components of protein, fat, carb, and color. And I like to call this the PFCC complex. It keeps it really simple for folks. When we move from like an easy training block, we might see the performance plate have half of the plate as that color component. So lots of, think like eat the rainbow. And really we should be doing this across the board, but half of that plate is color. We have a quarter of the plate as your protein, a quarter of the plate as carbohydrate. As we move into a more moderate training block, that color component shifts a little bit, and it's about a third of the plate now of color, a third of the plate as protein, a third of the plate as carbohydrate. And then we move to a hard training block. Think like peak race kind of season. That would be a hard training block. Now half of that plate is carbohydrate, a quarter color, and a quarter protein. And the reason for this shift is because as training volume specifically gets higher, your carbohydrate needs are much higher. You're burning through your muscle glycogen at a faster rate. Typically, and especially for my triathletes, typically you have 2 sessions in a day. So we don't have 24 hours for muscle glycogen to recover, which is the time span it needs to fully recover. So we have to be very intentional with those carbohydrate. And then, nutrient timing is something that we work on of like that post-workout, really making sure that you're getting in, I like to say 2 to 4 grams of carbohydrate to 1 gram of protein immediately post-workout. Really maximum time frame is 45-minute window for me. And that is in the simplest form, that is kind of what we work on, is really just looking at those performance plates, understanding where those performance plates can fit throughout the day, but also throughout the training block. And just keeping it simple.
I love that simplicity message there that you're providing, as well as just being able to use this pictorial image of plate presentation and changing these elements of nutrition depending on level of activity, and how useful that is, I'm sure, for people to do and maintain, because I came from a place in practice before the performance plate was developed and we were even using plate methods, and it was so much more complicated. People were keeping track of all their macros, and they were so numbers focused. And so I'm curious what you do when you have a person who says, oh, well, I need X amount of grams of this, or I need this many calories, and how you kind of reshape their perspective of that balance, it sounds like, with the plate. And are they receptive to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this question. So I would say everybody that comes to me has been tracking macros specifically.
Because they use apps to do it, right? So they're using like the apps, and this is what they're using to see. Yeah.
Yeah. Or, they were told
Eat to
by
Win
a coach.
doesn't do that, by the way. We use pictorial images in the Eat to Win app, which is built for athletes. So,
I love that.
Got to put that in there.
I love that. That is, I mean, there's so much value in really zooming out and listening to your body. And I think athletes are some of the most in tune people with their bodies. And certainly we see exercise, and especially intense or really long duration exercise, blunt the appetite. And so there's times I say we can be very intentional with our fueling. And I talked very shortly about nutrient timing in that post-workout window. That is very intentionally focused nutrition. Same thing with your pre-training nutrition. And then there's also times where we can be a little bit more intuitive, where, a rest day, maybe our appetite is really ramped up on a rest day and you're feeling hungry every 2 hours. So eat. If you're hungry, eat. And follow those performance plates to make sure you're getting in, yes, your macronutrients, so those protein, carbs, and fat, but also those micronutrients, all that color, those vitamins, minerals, complex carbs, your nuts and seeds, all those really good nutrients that you need. And really, again, at a heightened level as an athlete, because you're burning through those stores pretty rapidly. And this is, so in my practice, I use Practice Better as a electronic medical system. And it's really cool because you can take a picture of your food. And this is what I use with a lot of athletes is I'm like, just take a picture of your food. If you love the logging and that's something that makes sense for you, love that for you. Like, eventually I have them move away from that very gradually, and move more to a picture base. But that's a lot of what I do. And a big thing that I help individuals that come to me tracking macros understand is like macros, they do serve a purpose for, a moment in time, because it helps build awareness around, a nut, for example, it's not just a fat. It also has some protein and it also has a little bit of carbohydrate. So it's a complex little thing, a complex little food.
Right.
And so it helps build that awareness and understanding of kind of where to plug things in and what purpose they serve in your diet, where they fall on that performance plate. So that's really valuable. But then we have to zoom out and take that step back, because longevity and sustainability of nutrition is not tracking every morsel of food you put in your mouth. That's super tedious. And we have to just
Break away
learn to
from that.
listen to the body, and have food for fuel, but also for pleasure and enjoyment and all of the things. So
Wonderful. And I love how you also just tapped into the intuitive part of that, which is, really being able to recognize those hunger and satiety signals and listening to your body, and how that all kind of works collectively to lead someone to a healthier balance with food. So that was definitely well informed. Well, we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. And we're going to thank our sponsors. You're listening to the Eat to Win podcast with your host, Margaret Downs. Liquid Fuel is a new sports and hydration product formulated by a sports dietitian to give athletes the edge to train and compete longer. It contains low glycemic carbohydrate platinose designed to keep blood sugar levels more stable, to provide energy for 3 to 4 hours without the blood sugar crash seen in other leading sports drinks. Its unique 4-part electrolyte formula includes 50% of your daily magnesium need to optimize muscle function. Liquid Fuel is naturally sweetened, along with no artificial ingredients or colors. Currently being used by high school, collegiate, and professional teams, Liquid Fuel allows you to live life with confidence, knowing you're properly fueling your body. Visit drinkliquidfuel.com and use the code MSD10 to get 10% off your order. Welcome back to the Eat to Win podcast, where we are talking with Dana Sowards about empowering female endurance athletes with sustainable nutrition habits and strategies. So let's dive back in. We just had a really great conversation about, balancing nutrition for this population. And I kind of want to lean in now toward what they may be hearing through media and all the feedback that we get about diets and maybe fad diets and how beneficial these can be for performance nutrition. And so I'm interested in your position on some of the fads that are out there. I mean, we know lots of people are using keto. I've seen them too. We've got paleos and a variety of different tactics out there to try to control different aspects of nutrition. So what is your perspective?
so I think what's really important to understand here is that the data from these diets were initially performed in a clinical population of obese, sedentary men trying to lose weight for surgery or metabolic control, which is not what an endurance athlete is. Like, you're not sedentary. You're super active. And, if a lot of the population I work with is age group athletes that yes, they're also an endurance athlete, but they're also, a mom or a dad, and a professional and, doing lots of things. And so the studies really just aren't appropriate for this population for those dietary patterns. And if we kind of zoom in on female athletes specifically, both ketogenic and intermittent fasting, some of their main claims are basically, especially in endurance athletes, are triggering that metabolic switch or that ability to utilize fat for fuel. Females were already physiologically primed to do this. We are great fat burners. That's what we do. And so this, if we are looking at the role that ketogenic and intermittent fasting play in the body, it causes a lot of stress on our system to, one, especially for fasting, to leave our body in a catabolic state. And this can cause a lot of disrupt on things like your ability to build muscle. And for a lot of females, that's already a challenge. And specifically, women in our brain center called the hypothalamus, there are two reception areas for a neuropeptide called kisspeptin. And the primary function of kisspeptin is it acts on mood, behavior, your appetite hormones, so there's hunger and fullness, your libido, your reproductive hormones. And so this can actually downregulate all of those things, which causes a whole bunch of confusion. So I really discourage this in any athlete, honestly, but especially my females, because it really does your body a disservice in supporting it to do the work you're asking it to do and to also recover from the work that you are doing. So,
And one of my biggest takeaways with this whole thing too has been, do you want to do this the rest of your life? I mean, do you want to develop like healthy patterns that you can sustain forever as long as you live, or do you
right,
want to just be dieting forever? Like, it's just learn how to do it so you don't have to do all that.
totally. Yep.
But I also really appreciate the take on how athletes are different, and the fact that they really need different approaches. We have to kind of hone in on, like you said earlier, energy and all the things that they need to maintain healthy bodies, not just great performance. So
Yes.
there's a health factor involved as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you also mentioned earlier, and I know part of what you encounter is multitasking for women, and how they are challenged to be athletic, and they have a passion for their athleticism and their training, but they're also multitasking maybe as parents at 30 years old or becoming parents, and certainly the different challenges that careers place on time constraints. So, how do you kind of work around some of these constraints and time challenges that you might run into with this group?
Yeah. So, I think the biggest factor with especially my moms is because they wear so many hats, they they kind of, I mean, they butt up against time, right? And so it's like
Yeah,
there's only so many hours in a day. And so the first thing that I have, actually on one of our first calls, is I have them write down their non-negotiables for the week, or even if they have the month schedule, awesome, but certainly the week. And we kind of plug around that. It's a little bit like Tetris of like, okay, where's your time? Like where can we plug in meals? And I honestly have them program this because a lot of the feedback I get is I don't have time. And I'm like, well, then we're cutting your workout 10 minutes short, because if you're not eating, you're not going to recover and you can't go do it again tomorrow. So um so
yeah,
we're prioritizing that nutrition. We're looking at days that they can go grocery shopping and maybe have like a little buffer 20-30 minutes after they go grocery shopping to do a little bit of prep, just to set them up for success. That might be washing and chopping veggies, or getting some proteins cooked, or something like that. They can just have those components of the plate cooked so that they don't have to kind of be scrambling when it's like, oh, it's 5 p.m. and it's dinner and I don't know what I'm making tonight.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Which I know we've all done. I know. I was just going to say, like, who hasn't done that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it is so challenging. I mean, even for students, even for college
yeah.
students, and for, parents running around trying to help kids, like you said earlier, being misguided, right? As a younger athlete. I mean, a lot of parents are misguided and they also just don't have the time to figure all this out. So it
Hmm.
would be easy to mislead a child, to trying to figure out what they need. So that's certainly great advice, and trying to carve out just a few minutes around a very busy schedule to make time, and not use that as an excuse for being able to plan and move forward. Because I do feel like we can all find it. We just have to figure it out. Certainly
Yeah.
helps to have a dietitian like yourself be available during that process, and know that that's just critically important. So you give us great awareness into that as well. Lastly, I'd like to just leave our listeners with maybe a piece of advice that you would have for a younger female coming into this area of endurance sport. And, maybe your younger self, like, what would you tell her around, more sustainable performance nutrition? And what would you leave her with?
Yeah. So I would say that we really want to listen to your body and what it's telling you. If you are hungry, eat. If you are tired, take rest. Make sure that you are not just, and I always say, quote unquote, getting by with the bare minimum. Make sure you are fully supporting your sessions and your health, right? If you are not healthy, you cannot perform at your peak potential. So health first, performance comes second, and truly keep it simple. Do not overcomplicate your nutrition. Think of that performance plate: protein, fat, carb, color. Work with that dynamic and you're going to do awesome. It's going to, nutrition, there's a lot of noise out there, and social media certainly makes nutrition feel really, really complex. But if we just break it down into that performance plate in a way that feels approachable for you, it's going to be great. You're going to, you're going to crush it.
Well, it is really, really insightful to hear from you, Dana, and have your expertise to share with our listeners. You've really broken it down, the fact that having a dietitian on board is just extremely important for this entire age range of people, from young girls to around that age of giving birth and having a family, all the way up into menopause, perimenopause, and menopause. So thank you so much for that. And I want to leave our listeners with your contact information so they know how to get in touch with you, and we can wrap it up.
Thank you so much for having me.
So how can we get in touch with you?
Oh, so you can, my Instagram is a dash of Dana. And that's probably the best way to get in contact with me. My email is also dana@a-dana.us. So
Super.
both of those are really awesome ways.
Well, thank you again. And that is it for today's episode of the Eat to Win podcast show. Huge thanks to Dana Sowards for sharing her expertise in sports nutrition for female athletes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share with your community. And until next time, keep winning.
Thanks for joining us on the Eat to Win show. Remember, every meal is a step toward victory. Until next time, stay strong and keep winning.